How many people here have seen this lecture before? Any of you guys? You have? Okay, great. And you? So, probably a good thing I changed a couple of things. Oh, good. So if this one runs out. So, my name's Morgan McCarroll. I'm a physician who works out of Reno, and I also have a part-time job at Stanford. I do pediatric anesthesiology, and I teach anesthesia both through the University of Nevada and through Stanford University. Today we're going to talk about historic and recent hypoxia incidents as they pertain to flight, and legalities of oxygen supplementation, and also a little bit about hyperventilation and how it differs from hypoxia. And I'm going to finish up with hypothermia because it's so important with wave flight, though you wouldn't know it this week. As I said, I live in Reno. I do pediatric anesthesia. I work out at 2 universities as well. And I fly both powered airplanes and gliders. And I just have a very strong interest in high altitude flight and high altitude physiology. One thing you may notice that's not on there is I am not an AME, so any questions you might have about that, take my answers with a grain of salt. I do not speak for the FAA. And there's a view from my front house, from the front of my house. So we do get wave in the area occasionally. Most years. This has been the most bizarre winter ever, I think. At least we have some thermaling out there for you guys. So, rewinding all the way back to the 18th century, this is when people were experimenting with balloons. And in 1783, we record a height of 50 feet. And back then, we had people describing gas laws in the beginning. And these two were Drs. Charles and Guy Lussac were early pioneers in balloon development. Early on, we had Charles flying to 10,000 feet and describing ear pain. It's one of the first medically related complications of high altitude flight. Later on, Blanchard and Jeffries, while crossing the English Channel, found that they had lost a lot of their sensory perception, and were actually starting to see some hallucinations, or at least visual illusions, that were never noted crossing the English Channel by ship. And there's their... I love these old drawings. Blanchard had a heart attack flying over the Netherlands. First major complication recorded in history, flying.
And he probably didn't have a medical either.
Probably didn't. Probably didn't. But we'll talk about reasons why he might have had this cardiac event while he was flying over the Netherlands. And Piotr de Rosier was one of the first fatalities when he was in a hot air balloon, a hydrogen balloon fire. And his fiancee collapsed and died having witnessed the explosion. So there you have the first 3 fatalities. So we go from the 18th to the 19th century, we go from 10,000 feet to 22,000 feet, and now the descriptions are a little bit different. Now, Etienne Roberson talked about having heard calls, not caring. I mean, here he's a pioneer. He's taken this balloon over 20,000 feet. He should be absolutely ecstatic, and he knows he should be ecstatic, but he's not. And he found that he could place his hand in boiling water. And we know that the higher you get, the colder water boils. But still, 170 degrees will cause burns in less than a second, and he was holding his hand in boiling water. So we see that there's obviously something going on here. Now, fast forwarding to the 20th century, the King Air that was en route from Mount Isa to Lenora in Western Australia. This pilot was cleared to 25,000 feet, and as he was flying through 25,600, ATC said, what's your altitude, and so on, and pilot said, stand by, and that was all they heard. You can see why you'd want to have a nice short trip by plane rather than driving 47 hours between those 2 locations. Aircraft leveled off at 34,300 and stayed there until it ran out of fuel. Everybody on board was killed. This was thought to be due to hypobaric hypoxia, so high altitude, inadequate oxygen. Helios Airways, this was another relatively recent hypoxia-related incident. The probable cause was the crew didn't set the pressurization controls properly. They ended up flying into the side of a mountain, killing 121 people. And then there was
Payne Stewart?
Yep. Payne Stewart's Learjet. They did not recognize cabin depressurization and just flew it off into the ocean. Now, much more recent, and this can happen in gliders as well. A gentleman who spent more than 4 hours at 10,000 feet or higher in this glider, and ended up overrunning the end of the runway at Truckee. Had no injuries, but it was thought that the reason why he misguided the approach or misjudged the approach was because he would spend all his time at altitude with inadequate supplemental oxygen. As I recall, there was no supplemental oxygen involved. So we can have problems pretty low.
I observed that, and I wondered. I observed them fly up and down the runway a couple of times, retracting and extending the gear.
So
Instead of the spoilers, not behaving rationally, that's true. But then flying off down into the gravel area north of the field.
Interesting.
I think he was hypoxic before he took off.
It's possible. So I'm going to start the meat of my lecture with just a
Sorry.
no problem. I'm happy to have people jump in. We're going to be talking a lot about oxygen, so I thought it'd be reasonable to talk a little bit about the molecule that we rely on so much to take oxygen from our lungs to the rest of our bodies. Hemoglobin has 4 subchains to it, each of which have an iron center that binds oxygen molecules. The reason why this is important is each of these subunits binds oxygen at a little bit different rate. So what you end up with is when you expose hemoglobin to oxygen, it saturates not in a straight line, but in a sigmoidal manner. And the reason why this is important is that you can be sitting up here in the 90s, and in terms of oxygen saturation, how much oxygen your blood is carrying versus how much it possibly can carry. And if you're in the high 90s, you actually have a fair amount of leeway, ability to withstand a hypoxic insult, such as a failure of your oxygen system. But if you're sitting here in saturations in the low 90s, what ends up happening is you've lost some of that reserve, and you're on this steep portion of the curve. So when you can start out, you have less time between you have high saturation or normal saturation and are very, very hypoxic.
This is what we measure with those things that you put in.
Exactly. This is what we're measuring with those little clip-on pulse oximeters.
When will you start worrying, or what number? I mean, when I put it on normally either 99 or 98.
Yeah, I would start turning the oxygen up when it got down into the low 90s, 90, 91, 92. Or if you're on a system like the Mountain High system that automatically compensates for altitude, if the number starts falling from your baseline, I'd start looking for reasons why, such as a system failure. And we'll definitely talk more about that, but later on in the lecture I'm going to talk a little bit about shifting of this curve under various conditions, and so that's why I wanted to show this curve. Basically, when you shift the curve to the right, oxygen is being released more easily from the hemoglobin. When you shift it to the left, it's more difficult. The hemoglobin holds on to the oxygen more tightly.
Which is
So-
good.
Which is what this is an adaptation. So if you're in a situation with a low pH, so you're exercising, you've got more lactic acid in your muscles, you want more oxygen going to those muscles, so it's released more easily when you've been exercising. Same thing on the higher temperatures. That generally implies work. Your body wants to supply those areas that are working hard with more oxygen versus the areas that aren't working so hard. So temperature and carbon dioxide production is another thing that will cause a release of oxygen from hemoglobin. DPG just happened to be on this slide. That's a chemical that's produced during anaerobic metabolism when we're metabolizing glucose. And one interesting thing about DPG is it's very important for regulating oxygen in the human body, but animals that are adapted to live at very high elevations, camelids in particular, alpacas, llamas, those types of animals don't respond to DPG. Their high altitude adaptation has changed their hemoglobin to the point where they're no longer reliant on that as one of the mechanisms of changing. Just kind of an interesting side note. So what is hypoxia? Well, very simply put, it's less than adequate oxygen. And
Well, wait, can we back up just for a second?
of course, yeah.
Okay, so, because your comment about the high adaptation of the lung and such at high altitudes kind of triggers something.
Yes.
So, somebody from sea level, who lives at sea level by somebody who, like I lived at over 7,000 feet for several years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's different chemistry, that's a little different chemistry that's going
Yes.
on, right?
It definitely.
And so that plays in some way with what you're talking about here.
These changes here are on a very short-term scale. So the difference between how your hemoglobin acts when you're at rest versus if you get up and run around the parking lot and come back and then see how it reacts. A very short time frame. What you're talking about is adaptation that occurs over weeks to months. And I got a slide that goes through all of that a little later on.
What is the scale on the bottom? Is that
This
partial
is
pressure?
yes, that's partial pressure of oxygen, and this in the scale in the y-axis is how saturated the hemoglobin is. this is a place where I think the FAA got it right in the through the author of the glider flying handbook by breaking up hypoxia into 4 different types. Hypoxic hypoxia is inability to take oxygen from the air, get it through the lungs and into the blood. Hypemic hypoxia is normal ability for your lungs to get the oxygen in, but there's something wrong with the blood. Stagnant hypoxia, blood's fine, but it's not moving. And histotoxic hypoxia is blood's moving fine, it's getting to everywhere it needs to be, but our tissues are not able to use the blood or use the oxygen appropriately. And we'll definitely get more into detail there in just a moment. Symptoms of hypoxia: start feeling great, euphoric, everything's wonderful. Then you start to realize that stuff's not working the way it's supposed to. You're a little bit slower, you're lose some fine motor function, and these symptoms are very similar to what you would feel if you're hyperventilating. Hyperventilation is a situation where you're breathing quickly, you're blowing off the carbon dioxide that's in your blood, but your carbon dioxide production stays constant, and so you get rid of it faster than you're producing it, therefore the levels in your blood go down, and you end up with some imbalances that create difficulties with your ability to think. So if you're in a stressful situation, you're towing through rotor, for instance, that's stressful. You may be in the pattern with 4 other airplanes. Stressful. These are times when your heart rate and the respiratory rate are going to pick up, and you might start to get a little bit hypocapnic from the hyperventilating. Unconsciousness is the kind of the final complication of hyperventilation. Your body finally says, "Look, you're stressed out enough. Time to take a rest," and you'll pass out. Breathing will slow down. Slowly, your carbon dioxide levels will build back up again, and then you'll regain consciousness.
What is hypocapnia?
Hypocapnia is a low carbon dioxide level in the blood, and raises blood pH, and so it shifts that curve I showed you to the left, meaning that it prevents oxygen from being delivered to the tissues. So symptoms in common between hypoxia and hyperventilation. You can get headache, you can get decreased reaction time, impaired judgment. I love that. You get impaired judgment from these 2 things. But if your judgment is impaired, how do you know there's anything wrong? And that leads to this euphoria, and those kind of play off of each other. I'm feeling great. What a great flight. Everything's wonderful. If you start feeling that way, the take-home message here is start asking yourself what's wrong. And after being an anesthesiologist for a long time, I started to realize that every time I started thinking everything's going well, that's when I start looking at the machine, looking very closely at the monitors, saying, what have I missed? What's going on? What's about to happen here to make me wrong? So that's a very important thing. Visual impairment is kind of a late sign in both hypoxia and hyperventilation. You get drowsiness and lightheaded, and start to feel tingly and numb. When you're hypoxic, you tend to turn blue and tend to feel weak, limp. You're hyperventilating, it's more pale, you get more pale looking, not bluish looking. And your hyperventilation can also lead to muscle spasms. And very important to accurately self-diagnose. How do you treat hyperventilation? Tell yourself to relax. And when I say tell yourself to relax, if you're talking and talking normally, you can't hyperventilate. So if you talk yourself through the situation, I think I'm getting stressed out and hyperventilating now. Why am I doing this? It's a difficult toe. I think I better focus on the toe plane and make sure I'm not breathing too quickly. Just talk yourself through the problem. Perhaps I should make sure my oxygen system is functioning properly. Here is the mountain high box. I'm going to breathe in and see the lights work. It's just a very simple thing to do, but if you talk yourself through the situation, then you force yourself to slow your breathing down and to focus on the important aspects of what you're doing. And then that makes it easier to decide, well, is this hyperventilation or is there something wrong with the oxygen system? The whole breathing into a paper bag thing, well, you can do it, but the problem is that even though what you're doing is you're recirculating the carbon dioxide that you're producing, so you're not getting rid of it as quickly, you're depleting the oxygen that's available in that bag. So you're trading one problem for the other. And that's why it's really not a recommended treatment except in the last resort. So when you get hypoxic, so say for instance you have an oxygen system failure, how long can you function in a way that you can continue to make decisions that are potentially life-saving? And it varies by altitude, of course. So that's okay. At the bottom of the slide, it's 20,000 feet. You're good for actually quite a long period of time. Excuse me. As you get higher up, 25,000 feet, and that's, if you're on a good wave day and the wave window's open, 25,000 feet is not unheard of. You've got 3 to 5 minutes, depending on what your starting level of oxygenation was, and your health. You have 3 to 5 minutes to get yourself down if there's a sudden failure of the oxygen system. Getting up into 2 Lenny altitudes, that time drops down significantly. And just to put this in some perspective, say you're cruising along at 28,000 feet and your oxygen system freezes. If you deploy spoilers and go to a VNE dive, how fast are you descending? 2,500 feet per minute, maybe? So in 3 minutes, you're still above 20,000 feet.
So don't go up there unless you're in a 232 with terminal velocity limiting dive brakes that you can come down at about 15,000 feet a minute.
There you go. Yes. Yes. But the point is that you don't have much time if there's an oxygen system failure. You want to just get down and fix the problem, go up again. There's no problem with taking another flight. So this is a part of the presentation where being or some ridiculous thing like that. But the host of the show goes into an altitude chamber to kind of demonstrate how hypoxia affects human beings. And there are several things that we want to look at in his response. But a couple things are, he thinks throughout the entire video, he thinks he's getting all these questions right. He has no idea that he's slowly losing consciousness. And in the end, he's so far gone that he doesn't know to put his mask back on to save his own life. So this is pretty interesting.
I was just in Melbourne last week on this one.
Oh, really?
The same chamber.
Oh, how fun.
This is what we call recognition. Just recover, so Tell me what your experience is.
Little bit giddy.
There's the euphoria.
Physiologist Dr. Hans Wittenberg is monitoring Michael's condition by asking him to complete basic tasks.
Can you show me by sticking up your fingers how much 9 minus 5 is?
9 minus 5 would be 4.
Excellent.
Pretty early on.
That's the Asian trap.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Michael's brain is suffering from oxygen starvation, making him feel drunk,
Watch his breathing.
and overconfident.
Can you hold this up for me?
I can open it up there.
And can you put the
The
shape
color
in
of his
as well?
lips.
Alright, I think it's 4. I can't see that one.
Here. See?
Okay.
Excellent. We got the cards list.
It's the 3 of diamonds.
3 models.
Yeah.
Got no shape. Can you put it in?
Yes, it's the star. Yes.
It wasn't the 3 of diamonds, by the
Michael will
way.
eventually
No.
face an ultimate test. Will he be able to switch his oxygen back on? and
At
save
least
his
2
life?
times that he went past that star.
Or will he be too far gone to care?
How much is 8 minus 3?
8 minus 3 is 4.
Is it 4?
Minus 3. 8 minus 3 is...
Michael is dangerously hypoxic.
If one of my patients started looking like that blue, I'd be kicking my own self.
6 minutes. Put up the switches. We will die.
Just swing the match back on. He's experiencing what appears to be the perfect method of execution, and he doesn't care.
Put up the switches. We will die. Put up the switches.
All higher functions off. And watch how quickly he recovers.
Can you tell me how you feel now? How do you feel?
I feel much better.
Very
He
good.
feels better,
How
but
much
you
is
see his
8 minus
fingertips?
3? 5.
Still blue.
5.
So his brain recovers very, very quickly because of a lot of blood flow.
Actually, we're
Fingertips
descending
much less so.
to sea level again. We are at 26,000 feet.
How much longer until I would be unconscious?
Well, a matter of seconds. I guess 10 to 20 seconds, and then...
And from there to then,
That's
The whole time they were at
the final
26?
destination.
Think a little higher.
haven't stepped in. Right.
He saved your life today.
Okay.
Be very thankful.
Thank you.
But overall, Michael, was it painful?
I thought the experiment was a failure because I was getting all the answers right.
That's the scary part about
In the
this.
end, no.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought I was doing really well. I thought I'd risk you.
I certainly felt so.
It's not the same as the one now.
But I said it was one
It's
of
a
the
different one. But it looks the same on the
symptoms of
inside.
hypoxia.
I'm sure they're very
But I
similar.
had no idea that I was near death. I was just... I was very happy. Very happy. I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go.
Any questions on that? It's that's a very, very important thing to remember because even on a day like today, maximum altitude is 14,500 feet. So if you're pretty clever, you could be flying up into mid-teens or low to mid-teens, and if your bodies are adapted to sea level, you could start feeling some of those effects, especially on a warm day, fairly quickly. I mean, if you're up for an hour or two without oxygen on, definitely going to know it. Yes, sir.
When they put that oxygen on him, was it just free flowing or was it under pressure?
I believe it was under pressure, but not like if you had a system that was designed for flight for like 30 some thousand feet.
You know, when you're flying in a glider, you got these two things in your nose, so there is
Right.
no positive pressure. You get
Correct.
whatever the atmospheric pressure.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but yes, definitely.
Okay.
What altitude was he at?
26, I think.
So they were coming down,
They were
you
coming
said you
down.
were still at 26. So
I figure if
they were
he
higher
was-
than that.
He was functioning for 5 to 6 minutes before he really started to have a lot of effects. So I think 26,000 feet is probably pretty close to
Oh,
where
so
they were.
what we saw was cut. It wasn't.
Correct.
Okay.
There were some edits in there, but not a lot.
So one of the things I hear you say is there are these bailout logs. And I've always thought, oh, that's for bailing out, but really that's sort of a backup if you're at that altitude.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you're saying, full dive breaks, V and E is kind of on the edge as to whether you're going to get down low enough, fast enough. And so it's about the bailout log.
That's assuming you recognize it immediately.
Yeah, and all of this depends. I mean, I have a friend that came here 3 years ago, was flying a wave with somebody else, and they got hypoxia with the oxygen. And the guy was completely hypoxic. They said, I got the plane, we're going back. And they were at 25 away. So there's people, I mean, depends your age, are you a smoker, do you exercise, how much are you metabolic? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, all those things play into it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the specifics of each of those 4 types of hypoxia. I'm going to use this diagram repeatedly. In hypoxia, remember that's when we're not able to get oxygen from the outside through the lungs and into the blood. So normally at normal physiologic elevations, there's enough driving force from the atmosphere to force oxygen across our alveoli into the blood and into the hemoglobin molecules, which then take that oxygen throughout our bodies. Altitude is why we're here to talk about hypoxia. That's kind of the biggest factor for pilots on hypoxia. Hypoxia can also happen with things that affect the ability of oxygen to get across from the air to the blood. So infections, chronic lung disease, areas of the lung which might be collapsed for whatever reasons. And for the most part, you prevent this type of hypoxia by using supplemental oxygen. And normally at rest, we're using about 200 milliliters of oxygen per minute. So why can't we just put a nasal cannula on, like you're discussing, flow 200 milliliters a minute through it, and be good up into the flight levels?
Different pressure.
Exactly. You may recall Dalton's law in physics, where your total pressure is the sum of the partial pressures of the various gases in the system. With barometric pressure, that's like nitrogen, oxygen, argon, and then trace amounts of everything else. The percentage of oxygen is always, it's a constant 21, whether you're at sea level or 28,000 feet, but partial pressure goes down as you go up, and therefore that driving force to get the oxygen across the membranes is decreased. So as you get higher up, when you start at 760 torr at sea level, you get to 33,000 feet, you're down to just a fraction of that. This is just 21% of this. But you see, there, even at sea level, there's a fair drop between the partial pressure of oxygen and air and your arterial oxygen tensions. This is the amount of oxygen that's in your blood as it comes out of your lungs, goes through your heart, and then goes out to the rest of your body. So at sea level, we're starting out at 103 torr. 10,000 feet, you're only at 60% of that. And the predicted oxygen saturation, you're down into the mid-80s. But realize that the FAA says you're perfectly fine to fly with oxygen levels that low. Now, the only person I would, as an anesthesiologist, allow to run saturation at this level is somebody with congenital heart disease who lives there. When you get up to 18,000 feet, something we can do on a summer day out of Minden, now you're at about a third of your sea level arterial oxygen level. And get up to 33,000 feet and you got nothing. There's not enough partial pressure of oxygen to drive the oxygen across the membranes, so basically there's nothing there. When you are wearing a 100% non-rebreathing oxygen mask, and so at 33,000 feet, you're getting you're getting 100% oxygen, but the partial pressure of oxygen is only going to be 197. You're basically at about sea level in terms of your oxygen levels.
Okay, so I got a question about this. When you mean 100% oxygen,
If you're
but
breathing-
not pressurized.
Non-pressurized, 100% oxygen, right?
So just basically an on-demand system where you excel and it lets you have
This would
it.
actually be a system with a reservoir bag on it. So it's a continuous flow with a reservoir bag, and so you're guaranteed to be getting 100% oxygen as you're breathing. And so if you breathe 100% oxygen, that'll basically keep your oxygen levels up to 33,000 feet. After that, it drops fairly precipitously. Hypemic hypoxia is where you've got perfect function of your lungs, plenty of oxygen available, there's something the matter with the blood. So, something that reduces your blood's ability to carry oxygen. So anemia is one thing, just low blood hemoglobin levels. That's kind of the biggest one. Carbon monoxide poisoning, so if you fly powered planes or if you fly motor gliders, that's a definite consideration. That the carbon monoxide will attach itself very, very strongly to hemoglobin and prevent it from carrying oxygen. Smoking will cause carboxyl hemoglobin as well. Methemoglobinemia is a fairly rare condition where, once again, hemoglobin is unable to carry oxygen normally. And this is the only time when, with hypemic hypoxia, that you can actually turn blue.
And what was your issue with the power gliders? Why would that, with your carbon monoxide behind you?
Presumably, but you can still get, with some forms, you can get exhaust flow back in through the fuselage.
Yeah, also there's plenty of power gliders that have the engine in front.
Yeah, the G9 and the SF-25 and all those things with the Rotax up front.
About half of them have.
And if you're sitting on the ground with the engine going, you're waiting for your turn in the queue. You could be in a cloud of carbon monoxide. Just a consideration. It's usually not an issue. I've had this slide saying that methemoglobinemia can cause this type of hypoxia in my presentation for years, and I realized I never really talked about methemoglobinemia. And all I'm going to say is, if you, excuse me, if you have the congenital form, you probably will know about it before you can get a medical, or before you can consider flunking. So that's not really an issue. But if you're using solvents, or if you're on certain antibiotics, which would preclude your ability to fly, most likely, or if you're exposed to a lot of bacon, you can have the risk of developing some degree of methemoglobinemia, and that can affect your oxygen carrying capacity.
That's the nitrates.
Yep. So food preservatives. Just briefly mention that some women are predisposed to heavy monthly cycles and can be anemic as a result of that, therefore a little bit more sensitive to altitude. If you feel the need to ask, you should be wearing oxygen. Simple as that. We're not here to try to split hairs. Histotoxic, hypoxemia. So now we've got oxygen getting to tissues, but tissues just aren't able to use it for some reason. So we might have normal oxygen in the blood, but some sort of something is poisoning us. So if you have a habit of eating the pits from apricots, there's wine. Carbon monoxide once again, or people who are very, very sick with overwhelming bacterial infections. Once again, you're not going to be flying if you're like that, but that's the kind of things that are going to prevent you from being able to use the oxygen as it gets to the tissues. One last type of hypoxia is stagnant hypoxia, and that's when your blood's just not moving. And so we've got plenty of oxygen, plenty of ability to use it, but no ability to get it to the tissues. And if you've got some sort of occlusive disease in your vasculature, so coronary disease or cerebrovascular disease, peripheral arterial disease, these things prevent blood from flowing to the tissues and can cause, even though you might put a pulse oximeter on and have normal saturation, if you look at the oxygen levels in your tissues, it's going to be very low because of the inability of the blood to get to those areas. So we talk about peripheral vascular disease. People who have congestive heart failure, by definition, are not able to pump enough blood to meet their oxygen requirements. Decompression sickness is another place where we see that, and that's why we want to avoid flying to high pressure altitudes after doing deep dives. We get bubble formation, and those bubbles prevent oxygen from traveling to the tissues appropriately.
On that note, I've heard these stories of people getting decompression sickness just over the last few days just from multiple altitude flights, no diving involved.
It certainly is possible. And there's one of the ways you can prevent that is by starting oxygen very, very early. You're on the ground, for instance, and yeah, that can be helpful with it. And it's usually not a problem with flying, although it's theoretically possible. Excuse me. The very nice thing about decompression sickness and flying is that the cure is landing. If you are doing a deep water dive, you can't just jump up to the surface if there's a problem. So that's one of the places we have an advantage over divers. Sustained acceleration, so acrobatics, aerobatics are another cause of this form of hypoxia. We were talking about adaptation earlier. So why is it that people can climb to the top of Mount Everest without oxygen, and yet we can't just jump in the glider and fly up to 28,000 feet without killing ourselves if we didn't have supplemental oxygen? And the reason is that these expeditions take place over weeks to months rather than minutes to hours. And people die on these expeditions as well. So there's several different adaptations that we have. Early on, we're going to breathe faster, and that has concerns with oxygen unloading. It shifts that oxygen dissociation curve a little bit, but not too terribly much. We tend to pee more. When I say caution, with increased cardiac output, so your heart rate and your stroke volume both increase. That's probably what killed Jeffries over the Netherlands. Because he explained. when your cardiac output increases, your need for oxygen going to the heart increases. And if you have coronary artery disease or a blockage in any of the arteries that supply the muscle of the heart, then that blockage prevents adequate blood from going to the muscle. And so you can get areas of the heart muscle that either are stunned from not enough blood flow or can actually die from it. And that can lead to all sorts of problems, but basically that's causing a heart attack. And so my theory is that flight over the Netherlands caused the need for immediate adaptation to altitude, which included the increase in heart rate and stroke volume, which then led to some ischemia, which eventually caused him to have a heart attack.
But if he'd been on supplemental oxygen, he would have been okay?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Now, these are all short-term types of adaptations. You can only increase your blood flow to the brain by a certain amount, and eventually we lose the ability to dilate the blood vessels going to the brain. So this only works to a certain point. Over days to weeks, your cells will develop more mitochondria. Mitochondria are where your it's kind of the final point in respiration where our bodies are using oxygen to produce energy. If you make more mitochondria, you're more efficiently able to utilize whatever oxygen you have. So this is kind of the opposite of the histotoxic hypoxemia that I was talking about. Histotoxic hypoxemia is when you prevent those mitochondria from doing their jobs. Here, you're making more mitochondria to do a better job. And eventually you'll also start producing more red blood cells, more hemoglobin, and over a longer period of time, you'll start actually building new blood vessels, new small blood vessels, to try to more efficiently get blood to the tissues. So this is what the difference is when you live at 7,000 feet or more over a longer
Those are
period of time.
reversible.
Yes,
So you're
correct.
at sea level, then gradually those go.
Most of those effects do go away. Their capillary density probably takes a lot longer to decrease. And once your body makes blood vessels, it doesn't tend to destroy them, at least not at the same rate as it makes them. But these two right here are the main reason why many athletes will train at high altitude to try to pack their blood and be able to use oxygen more efficiently when they get down to their sea level competitions. Supplementation, I think we're all familiar with 91-211, where we have to wear oxygen about 12,500 feet if we're there for more than 30 minutes. These are minimums, as I showed in that chart with oxygen levels. 10,000 feet, we're already hypoxic. So we should consider wearing oxygen very early on if we're going to do any sort of altitude flying. Systems are incredibly varied, and they all consist of a source, a regulator, and a delivery device. Sources can be just oxygen cylinders, and most general aviation aircraft and gliders use oxygen cylinders. Concentrators and generators are also used, but can be very, very dangerous. If anyone remembers that Valuejet crash in the Everglades a number of years ago, that was felt to be due to the presence of oxygen generators in the cargo hold that weren't stored properly. Regulators are there to take your pressure from 1,000 or almost 2,000 pounds per square inch down to something that's not going to blow your brains out. They can be simple mechanical valves or computer-controlled pulse demand systems. it's just important to know what you have and how to use it. Simple mechanical regulator just gives you most of them have an oxygen gauge on them and a dial on the side where you can dial in the flow you're interested in. What you see on the number there is not necessarily what you're getting, so you want to have one of those pulse oximeters that you're talking about. If you're going to be spending any time at altitude, just having that pulse oximeter is a very, very good tool to know that your oxygen system is working. Goal should be, you want your saturations to be in the low to mid 90s. You're not gaining a lot by pushing your saturation to the high 90s or 100%, but you end up using a lot more oxygen to get it there. Normal heart rate is important because, as I said earlier, one of your early adaptations to hypoxia is your heart rate will increase. And so the saturation number might be normal, but if your heart rate's 120, chances are you probably are a little bit hypoxic. And just bump the level up a little bit and you'll be good.
Will hyperventilation also make your heart rate go up?
It can, yes. Yes. So there's a picture of a pulse oximeter. On this particular one, the saturation's on top and the heart rate's on the bottom. But you want to make sure that you know which number is which.
The other one would be.
Although when I'm flying, the two seem to be equal most of the time, so probably because this guy and his sisters are on board usually. The Nelson flow meter is just a variation of the mechanical device. Instead of being calibrated in liters per minute, these are calibrations at altitude. So on the right side, you have a larger scale, and that's used with an oxygen conserving type, either cannula or mask. And the left side is with a, no, I've got it backwards. Left side is with an oxygen conserving device, right side is with a standard cannula or mask. And so what you do is you just set the ball to whatever altitude your maximum is going to be, and it in theory will deliver the amount of oxygen a normal, healthy adult of average size requires. So if for whatever reason you're going to have higher than average oxygen requirements, you need to go up a little bit. If you're smaller than average, then you need to go down a little bit. And that's why a pulse oximeter is a very important adjunct to this type of delivery system. Pulse demand systems are what the gliders here are equipped with. Instead of flowing oxygen continuously, the way the simple regulators and the Nelson regulators work, they will only deliver oxygen as you inhale. And most systems also change the amount of oxygen delivered depending on what your pressure altitude is. The mountain high system used here has 4 different modes of operation. The now or night mode, you click to that, it starts flowing immediately and it flows higher as you fly higher. The delay mode, if you're really cheap and you don't want to use oxygen early on, you're trying to just stretch your oxygen supply to its absolute maximum limit, you can set a delay function here, and the system won't start flowing until you either reach pressure altitude of 5,000 feet or 10,000 feet. And one of the former instructors here, Jeffrey, used to say, oxygen is cheap, why bother? Face mask mode, when you get up into the flight levels, you're required to wear a face mask, and the mountain high system will flow more oxygen in that situation if you set it to face mask. The other thing is if for whatever reason you need more, the night mode is going to provide for you, or normal mode is going to provide. If you set it to face mask, you'll get that the amount of oxygen required in addition to normal for that particular level. So F5 is going to give you what it would normally give at 5,000 feet, plus an extra 5,000 feet worth. And 10, it's going to give you an extra 10,000 feet worth. So the higher you get, the more oxygen you need. The higher you set this, the more oxygen it's going to give you. But these are also altitude compensated, so if you set it at F5, it doesn't mean you're only going to get what you require at 5,000 feet if you go up to 15,000 feet. It's giving you that much extra all the way through the flight ranges.
Let me make sure I understand that. Let's say I have somebody, I want to make sure they get the maximum. If I put them on F5, they're going to get it as soon as we're at 5,000 feet. And
What they're going to do is they're going to get that much additional oxygen.
So F20 would be
Even at
20,000.
sea level.
Right, so at F20 is probably a good way to look at it, because if you set it to F20, you might just be at 5,000 feet, but you're getting the amount of oxygen that is needed for 20,000 feet.
So
Maybe like 25.
25.
But if I set them at F5 and we go to 10,000,
That's an addition on the barometric
It's not the
amount,
start
right?
of it.
It's
Even at sea level,
correct
if you put it
plus
on-
5 or correct plus 10.
Yes.
so what do I
Yes.
set it for a person I believe has a high oxygen need?
Manual.
No, I did one of the other settings.
You can, it really depends on how much more you need. This is probably where you want to be, somewhere in the F settings. And you can start at F5 or F10, stick a pulse ox on them and see where they go. If they need more, then you can click it a little bit higher. But if you're really concerned, then the reserve/manual mode is probably where you want to be. Because it'll flow the maximum amount of oxygen available to each breath. It's still a pulse demand system. You're not just getting the continuous blast. So this flows at the highest rate that the mountain high system will allow, and it is not compensated for altitude. So it's going to flow maximum whether you're at sea level or 28,000 feet.
That's the maximum per pulse, you said it's not
Yes.
just a wide open flow.
Correct. So it's just going to be,
So you have to remember to breathe through your nose.
actually no. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is what the modes look like on the mountain high system. This just goes back to what I was saying. You want to be familiar with whatever system your aircraft or glider has. And the nice thing about the mountain high is that it gives you an explanation of each of the modes right on it. Nasal cannulas can be used up to 18,000 feet, and if you don't have a mountain high system, there are cannulas that have a little breathing bag built into them, so that as you're exhaling, the bag slowly fills up. When you inhale, you suck what's in the bag out as well as what's flowing continuously. So you save a little bit of oxygen that way. Face masks can be a little bit more constricting. Those of us with facial hair don't get a very good seal with them, so with the pulse demand system, they don't work quite as well. And they require more oxygen flow than a cannula because you need enough oxygen flow to blow whatever CO2 is left in the mask between breaths out, so you're not rebreathing that CO2.
But those ones.